Hello, my name's Jonathan Dunne, and this is the fifth in a series of videos called Theological English. When I say theological English, I'm really talking about what I understand to be the spiritual content of language. And when I say the spiritual content of language, I suppose that I'm saying it's content that was put there not by us. And this is where my work on language differs from the science of etymology, which looks at the evolution of words over time. Really, it looks at human history. And I regard this as horizontal over time, how a word develops, how it evolves, how it was pronounced 2,000 years ago and how it is pronounced today. So it's really linked with our own history as human beings, and typically we place ourselves very much at the center of events. But the spiritual content of language, I think, is happening outside time, behind time, in eternity. It has always been and always will be. It was not put there by us. And I think that's a rather shocking statement for human beings to accept, because we tend to think that everything was put there by us and everything is there for us to use as we see fit. And this is a rather fatal mistake, as is shown by our treatment of each other, our treatment of other cultures, and indeed our treatment of the environment. We take very much what we need, and we don't worry so much about what we leave behind. I think if language has a spiritual content, meaning inside words, then you have to wonder where that meaning comes from. If it's not put there by us, we did not decide to use a certain word to describe something because it contains other information inside it. That's just how things have turned out. But I believe that there is a purpose, there is a design, there is a higher being called God. And given that we talk about Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as the Word, it seems to me surprising that we haven't linked the studies of theology and linguistics, because if God is the Word, He is central to language. And language may even be considered a living entity. In the same way that I think the environment has its own message, has its own language, to an extent is language, which we can learn to read, but only if we do not place ourselves at the center of things. And unfortunately, I think in a lot of science, in a lot of academic knowledge, we are looking at things in a historical way, a horizontal way that places human history very much as the cause of events. And we're not prepared to take ourselves out of the picture a little bit and to look at things for their own worth. Not what we can get out of them, but what they themselves are. Now, everything I've talked about in the previous 4 videos took me several years to understand and work out. Where I started in 2004, having recently moved from England to Bulgaria, was with the word connections that I'm going to begin to talk about today. I had a sweet little apartment on the 8th floor of an apartment block, and the house martins used to fly early in the morning just at the level of my apartment. So I would sit from 6 until 8 before breakfast, making word connections, looking at words, their content, what was inside them, while the house martins flitted to and fro in front of the kitchen window. It was a very beautiful experience. What happened to me, and I'd already been a professional translator of literature for 10 years before that, so I'd already been working with language, having also learned languages at school and studied languages at university, was that the whole of my language, not a language I'd considered translating, I always thought you translated from foreign languages, fell apart in front of my eyes. It disintegrated, and I was allowed to see inside language for the first time. I wasn't standing on the outside, looking at language from the outside. I was able to go into the structure of language, and it was a very absorbing, intense experience that lasted perhaps 6 to 9 months, and then gradually faded away, and really the body of the work was done in those 6 to 9 months back in 2004. And after that I just fine-tuned it and found a system and these things. But where I started was with the words themselves. I suddenly saw that words contain meaning, and they've not evolved in that way so that we put that meaning in them. They have that meaning without our knowledge. And that's something I'm trying to shed light on here. Now, there are different ways that you can make word connections. You can read words in the same order, with the same letters. You can rearrange the letters so that the words have the same letters but in a different order. You can change the vowels. Remember that vowels are fluid, they flow. If you hold a vowel sound, water will collect in your mouth. So it's very easy to change vowels. Some languages don't even write them down. They are so fluid. You can change the consonants, what I consider to be the flesh of language, according to the phonetic pairs that I talked about in the previous video. You can then change letters according to their position in the alphabet. You can go from D to E, from R to S, for example. And you can change letters according to their appearance. You can turn them back to front, B, D. You can turn them upside down, M, W. That's really it. That's really the system for discovering the spiritual content of language. Same letters, same order, same letters, different order, change of vowels, change of consonants according to phonetics where they are pronounced in the mouth, and change according to the letter's position in the alphabet, the letter's appearance. And we will go into further detail in the next few videos. Today I'm going to start at the beginning, which is the same letters and the same order. Now, these are by far the fewest because it's quite difficult to find connections without making any changes at all. But we have already seen a couple of examples for connections made with the same letters and the same order. We saw the example of human in the previous video. Now, if you look at an etymological dictionary, it will tell you that human comes from the Latin word homo, meaning man. That's the historical evolution of the word. But I was suggesting that human is actually a combination of who, which is the root of our word God, and the first word, the human apparatus, is capable of producing, breath, and the first vowel from the back of the mouth, from the throat, which is you, who, and man. So in effect, a human is a God man. He is called to become a God by grace. I also mentioned the example of nowhere. If you look at the etymology of the word nowhere, it will say no and where. That is, it's not to be found in any place. But I suggested you can also read nowhere, now, here. So when people say that God is nowhere to be found, well, maybe he is actually now here. I'd like to give another example of a connection with the same letters in the same order, and that is the word passion. Now, when we're looking at new connections that you haven't seen before, feel free to pause the video and try to work it out for yourself. See what information you can find inside the word, that the word itself is telling you. This is how I made the connections myself in the first place. Back in 2004, I used to write the words on a piece of paper, move the letters around, see what I could find inside them. Passion contains the words pass, I, on. I pass on. In a sense, I die. Now, it's a very common concept in theology that the passions are what make us die spiritually, and the virtues are what make us live spiritually. By doing good, we become spiritually alive. By indulging the passions, greed, lust, anger, we cause harm, not only to others, but to ourselves, and so we die spiritually. So I think in the word passion itself, you can see this because it contains the phrase, pass I on. I die spiritually. Now we're going to make some very small changes, Still really the same letters, same order, but if you remember in the previous video, I talked about the semivowels. Y and J correspond to the vowel I, and W corresponds to the vowel U. So here I'm going to make a very small change and change this Y into I. Can you see a connection? Obey. Obedience is considered the most important virtue for a monk to cultivate. He is supposed to show obedience, blind obedience in many cases, to his spiritual father. And this is how he progresses in the spiritual life. And I think we can see this in the very word, because obey, if we change that Y into an I, can be read O-B-I. O-B-I. It's as if you are making an exclamation. Oh, calling on someone, the vocative. Oh, and asking them to take over your position, your life to a degree, and teach you how to live, tell you what to do, relying on their spiritual maturity, that what they are going to tell you is going to help you spiritually. And I think we can see this in the word oh, the person you are talking to. Be I. Somehow take my character, who I am, and make me better. And in the word Pharisee, again, I'm going to make a very small change because the sound f can be written ph as it is in Greek with the letter phi. So I'm going to make a very small change here and read Pharisee as far I see. Now, the Pharisees in Jesus' time were very famous for thinking that they were always right, that they were better than others, that they could see further than others, that they understood things in a better way. And actually, Jesus very often accuses them of hypocrisy, of saying things that they themselves don't do, or criticizing him for healing on the Sabbath. So I think in his eyes they were not examples of wisdom, but they themselves thought that they were. And I think we can see this in the word itself. Pharisee, far I see. Now, I'm going to move on and look at two contractions which contain an apostrophe. I'll, the contraction of I will, and will, the contraction of we will. Now, I think language is often trying to get us to think in terms of the plural, to think in terms of the collective, the common good, not the selfish demands of the individual, which don't really help other people. I think we are meant to curb our own will to an extent in order to seek the common good. And this is something that age, life, teaches us. But I think language wants to teach us this also. And if you take away the apostrophes, you will see that when we think in terms of the future, about the future only in terms of ourselves, of the ego, we are actually ill. But when we think about the future in terms of the collective, the common good, then we are well. Ill, well. This for me is a very beautiful connection, and one of several instances in which language exhorts us to think in terms of the plural, the collective, the common good. And now I'd like to look at the word God. In this instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to double a letter. God contains 3 letters. I'm going to double one of them. Can you see a word that is clearly related to God? Good. God is good. And I think language wants to tell us this. Now you may say, well, of course the words are connected because they have the same etymology, the same roots. But the trouble is they don't. I copied the etymology of these 2 words, God and good, from the shorter Oxford English dictionary. Here you've got God, which, as I've said several times, comes from the Sanskrit word who, meaning invoke the gods. This is taken from the shorter Oxford English dictionary, whereas good derives from the Gothic, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this word, gops, which has the meaning bring together, unite. It's actually related etymologically to the word gather. Good is related etymologically to the word gather, not God. But there you have it. God is good. And it's natural for language, which, in my opinion, never lies, even if we use it to lie. Language itself doesn't lie. And so language is telling us God is good. And what's remarkable is that you can then say the devil is evil. And all you've done is take away the letter D. Now, these 2 words do not share the same etymology. Devil comes from the Greek diabolos, accuser, slanderer. Evil comes from the Gothic ubils. They do not share the same etymology, but there you go. The fact is that God is good and the devil is evil, and there is language to show us this. This is what I mean about the spiritual content of language not being put there by us, but somehow being there out of time. Now, I'd like to finish this video by looking at some homophones. These are not written with the same letters in the same order, but they sound the same. And I've already given the example of who, the root of our word God, Sanskrit for invoke the gods, sounding exactly the same as the question word who. And I think there's a very good reason for this. The question word who and the question word how are what we should be asking, but we normally ask what or why. I also looked at the similarity between Son, as in Son of God, and the star that lights our day and our night, the sun. And I think, again, there is a connection here. Even though they are spelt slightly differently, I think they sound the same for a reason. And I'd like to finish by looking at 3 more examples. The first of these is prophet. The Old Testament is full of prophets that the Israelites, the people, are meant to heed. They're meant to listen to them, but very often they don't. And I find it remarkable that prophet, spelled P-R-O-P-H-E-T, sounds exactly the same as prophet, P-R-O-F-I-T. And it seems to me that rather than heeding God's truth and being guided by the prophets, we actually seek to make a profit for ourselves, for the ego, not for the common good. If it was for the common good, we would plough profits back into society to make the world a better place. But I'm not sure that that is what is happening. So I think there is a reason for that similarity in the sounds between prophet and prophet. We tend to pay more attention to making a profit rather than God's truth as expressed by the prophets. The last 2 are heal and soul. Now, if you think of the act of walking, the act of pilgrimage in this life, what we do is we put our heel on the ground and we move forward onto our sole. We lift off the ground and back again to heel, soul, heel, soul. Now, I would like to suggest that this pilgrimage we are on through life, through the 7 ages of man, is actually meant to heal, H-E-A-L, our soul, S-O-U-L. And that can be seen in the words themselves. And no human can say, well, I made the word to be like that because I wanted it to contain that information. The fact is, it's the words that contain that information. And it's not us who put that knowledge there. In the next video, we will look at some more examples, but this time we will start to change the order of the letters, rearrange them. Very often, read the word back to front, because you will find amazing things if you read words back to front.